The leader of the expedition was Igor Dyatlov. He was 23 years old, quiet, focused, highly respected by both students and professors. Dyatlov was known for his discipline, for his careful planning, for his ability to stay calm when others panicked. He believed in preparation, in precision, in control. Joining him were 8 other young hikers, men and women in their early 20s. They were not thrill seekers, they were engineers, students, future professionals of the Soviet Union. Each member had passed strict requirements to qualify for an expedition of this level. They trained for months, studied maps, practiced survival techniques. This was not an impulsive journey. For many of them, this expedition was meant to be a final challenge before graduation. A test of endurance, of teamwork, of trust. They trusted Dyatlov and they trusted each other. The expedition officially began on January 23rd, 1959. From the very start, conditions were harsh. Freezing temperatures, strong winds, limited visibility. But the group adapted quickly. They moved with confidence. They laughed. They joked. Their diaries reveal a sense of pride, even excitement. Photographs from the journey show smiling faces, thick coats, heavy backpacks, no fear, no hesitation. On January 28th, one member turned back due to illness. He survived. The remaining 9 continued forward. On January 31st, they reached the edge of the forest. They prepared for the final ascent. Food supplies were organized, equipment was checked. That night, they wrote their final diary entries. Nothing in those pages suggested fear, nothing suggested danger. The next day, they climbed higher and pitched their tent on the slope of Kolatsyakal, a name given by the local Mansi people. It means mountain of the dead. That night, something happened, something sudden, something overwhelming, and by morning, everyone was gone. When the group failed to return on time, no one was immediately alarmed. Delays like this were common in the Ural Mountains. Weather could change suddenly. Routes could take longer than planned. At first, instructors at the university assumed the hikers were simply late. One day passed, then another. Still no message, no signal, no sign of life. Families began asking questions. Friends grew uneasy. The agreed return date had passed, and the silence was becoming impossible to ignore. After several days, concern turned into fear. A search operation was finally authorized. Students, volunteers, and experienced rescuers were sent into the mountains. Later, even the Soviet army would become involved. Helicopters circled above endless white terrain. Search parties moved slowly through deep snow, calling out names that never answered. The conditions were brutal, temperatures well below freezing, strong winds, almost no visibility. As the days passed, hope began to fade. Then, near the slopes of Kolatsyakal, something appeared in the snow. It was the tent, standing alone, silent, out of place. From a distance, it looked almost normal, but as the rescuers got closer, they realized something was terribly wrong. The tent was still upright, it had not been flattened by a storm, it had not been buried by an avalanche. It stood exactly where the hikers had pitched it, but the fabric was damaged. Several long cuts ran across the side of the tent, not torn by wind, not ripped by force from the outside. They had been made deliberately from the inside. This detail would become one of the greatest mysteries of the case. Inside the tent, everything remained. Boots were neatly arranged, heavy winter jackets lay untouched, food supplies were still there, a stove, maps, personal belongings. Nothing suggested panic inside the tent, no overturned equipment, no signs of struggle, yet for some reason, every single person had fled. Outside, investigators noticed something even stranger. Footprints. They led away from the tent down the mountain slope toward the forest. The prints were surprisingly calm, not scattered, not chaotic. Some were made by people wearing socks, others made by bare feet. In minus 30 degrees, there were no signs of running, no sign of a chase. The footprints slowly disappeared under drifting snow. The message was chilling. They had left the tent voluntarily, one by one, into the darkness, and whatever made them do it was terrifying enough to make them abandon their only chance of survival. The search continued downhill, toward the forest. That was where the footprints ended. Not suddenly, not violently. They simply faded into the snow. Deep among the trees, rescuers discovered the first signs that something had gone terribly wrong. Beneath a tall cedar tree, they found the remains of a small campfire. Burned branches, charred wood. Someone had tried to survive here. Nearby lay the first 2 bodies. They were almost naked, wearing only underwear. Their skin was darkened by frost, their hands damaged as if they had clawed at the tree in desperation. The cause of death was clear, hypothermia, but the scene raised disturbing questions. Why had they removed their clothes? Why had they not returned to the tent, which was clearly visible uphill? As the search expanded, 3 more bodies were discovered. They were scattered between the forest and the campsite, lying face down in the snow, frozen mid-motion. Their positions told a silent story. They were trying to go back to the tent, back to safety, but they never made it. At this point, investigators believed the mystery was over. A tragic accident, a bad decision, a deadly night. They were wrong. Months later, when the snow finally began to melt, the search resumed. That was when the most horrifying discovery was made. In a deep ravine covered by meters of snow lay the remaining 4 bodies. What rescuers saw changed the case forever. These hikers had not simply frozen. Their injuries were catastrophic. Multiple ribs crushed inward, skulls fractured, but their skin was largely intact. No knife wounds, no bruises, no signs of a fight. Medical examiners would later state that the force required was similar to that of a high-speed car crash. One woman was missing her tongue, another was missing soft tissue from her face. Yet there was no blood in the surrounding snow, as if the injuries had occurred without violence, without resistance. Even more disturbing details followed. Some of the clothing worn by these hikers tested positive for radiation, not background levels, not contamination from the environment, but unusual readings that investigators could not explain. To this day, no natural phenomenon has been able to fully account for the pattern of injuries. Something had happened in that ravine. Something powerful, sudden, and unseen. As the bodies were recovered, the pressure on investigators intensified. This was no longer a simple rescue operation, it was a national embarrassment. 9 young citizens, highly trained, dead under unexplained circumstances. The Soviet authorities demanded answers. An official investigation was launched, autopsies were conducted, reports were written, but the conclusions raised more questions than answers. The medical reports confirmed what rescuers had already suspected. Some died of hypothermia, others suffered massive internal injuries, injuries that did not match any known natural cause, no signs of a fight, no evidence of an avalanche, no indication of an animal attack. Investigators interviewed witnesses, reviewed photographs, analyzed diary entries. Nothing explained the panic. Then came the final statement. The hikers had died as a result of an unknown overwhelming force. Those words would define the case forever. Shortly after, the investigation was quietly closed. Access to files was restricted. The area was sealed off. For years, no one was allowed to enter the region. Families were discouraged from asking questions. Public discussion was shut down. Newspapers stopped reporting on the case. The story faded, but it was never forgotten. Decades later, when the files were finally declassified, people expected answers. Instead, they found missing pages, redacted documents, photographs that raised new doubts. The official conclusion remained unchanged. An unknown force, and the silence surrounding it only deepened the mystery. As details of the case slowly became public, theories began to spread. Some believed it was an avalanche, but experts pointed out problems. The tent was not buried, the slope was relatively gentle, and the footprints remained visible for hundreds of meters. Others suggested military involvement. Witnesses in nearby villages reported strange glowing lights in the sky on the night of the incident. The region was known for secret Soviet weapons testing. Could the hikers have encountered something they were never meant to see? Then there was the theory of infrasound. Under certain wind conditions, low-frequency sound waves can cause extreme anxiety, panic, and physical discomfort. A sound you cannot hear, but one that your body feels. Could it have triggered sudden terror? Some proposed an animal attack or a confrontation with locals, but there was no evidence, no tracks, no signs of struggle, and then there were the theories no one wanted to discuss. That the hikers encountered something unknown, something not yet understood, something that frightened them so deeply they chose the cold over the tent. Even today, modern investigations and computer simulations have failed to produce a single explanation that fits every detail. The truth remains buried somewhere in the snow. The Dyatlov Pass incident did not end with the closing of the case. It followed the families, the investigators, and the region itself. For years, relatives of the victims searched for answers. They studied photographs, they reread reports, they noticed contradictions that were never explained. Some files were incomplete, others appeared altered, entire pages were missing. When former investigators were questioned decades later, their answers were vague. Some refused to speak at all, others admitted that certain details were never made public. Over time, the incident began to attract attention far beyond the Soviet Union. Scientists, journalists, independent researchers, new theories emerged, new simulations were run. Modern technology offered possibilities that did not exist in 1959. Yet even with advanced modeling, no explanation accounted for everything. Not the footprints, not the injuries, not the behavior. In recent years, official reinvestigations have